The Skillful Huntsman, a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. There was once a young fellow who had learnt the trade of a locksmith and told his father he would now go out into the world and seek his fortune. "Very well," said the father, "I am quite content with that," and gave him some money for his journey. So he traveled about and looked for work. After a time, he resolved not to follow the trade of locksmith any more, for he no longer liked it. Instead, he took a fancy to hunting. One day, while wandering, he met a huntsman dressed in green who asked whence he came and whither he was going. The youth said he was a locksmith's apprentice, but that the trade no longer pleased him and he had a liking for hunting. He then asked if the huntsman would teach him. "Oh, yes," said the huntsman, "if thou wilt go with me." The young fellow went with him, bound himself to him for some years, and learnt the art of hunting. After this, he wished to try his luck elsewhere, and the huntsman gave him nothing in the way of payment but an air gun, which had the property of hitting its mark without fail whenever he shot with it. Then he set out and found himself in a very large forest, which he could not get to the end of in one day. When evening came, he seated himself in a high tree in order to escape from the wild beasts. Towards midnight, it seemed to him as if a tiny little light glimmered in the distance. He looked down through the branches towards it and kept well in his mind where it was. First, he took off his hat and threw it down in the direction of the light so that he might go to the hat as a mark when he had descended. Then he got down, went to his hat, put it on again, and went straight forwards. The farther he went, the larger the light grew, and when he got close to it, he saw that it was an enormous fire and that 3 giants were sitting by it, roasting an ox on a spit. Presently, one of them said, "I must just taste if the meat will soon be fit to eat," pulled a piece off, and was about to put it in his mouth when the huntsman shot it out of his hand. "Well, really," said the giant, "if the wind has not blown the bit out of my hand," and helped himself to another. Just as he was about to bite into it, the huntsman again shot it away from him. On this, the giant gave the one who was sitting next to him a box on the ear and cried angrily, "Why art thou snatching my piece away from me?" "I have not snatched it away," said the other. "A sharpshooter must have shot it away from thee." The giant took another piece, but could not keep it in his hand, for the huntsman shot it out again. Then the giant said, "That must be a good shot to shoot the bit out of one's very mouth. Such a one would be useful to us." He cried aloud, "Come here, thou sharpshooter. Seat thyself at the fire beside us, and eat thy fill. We will not hurt thee. If thou wilt not come, and we have to bring thee by force, thou art a lost man." The youth went up to them and told them he was a skilled huntsman, and that whatever he aimed at with his gun, he was certain to hit. They said if he would go with them, he should be well treated, and they told him that outside the forest there was a great lake, behind which stood a tower. In the tower was imprisoned a lovely princess, whom they wished very much to carry off. "Yes," said he, "I will soon get her for you." They added, "There is still something else. There is a tiny little dog which begins to bark as soon as anyone goes near, and as soon as it barks, everyone in the royal palace wakes up. For this reason we cannot get there. Canst thou undertake to shoot it dead?" "Yes," said he, "that will be a little bit of fun for me." After this, he got into a boat and rowed over the lake. As soon as he landed, the little dog came running out and was about to bark, but the huntsman took his air gun and shot it dead. When the giants saw that, they rejoiced, thinking they already had the king's daughter safe. However, the huntsman wished first to see how matters stood, and told them that they must stay outside until he called them. Then he went into the castle, where all was perfectly quiet and everyone was asleep. When he opened the door of the first room, he saw a sword hanging on the wall made of pure silver, with a golden star on it and the name of the king. On a table nearby lay a sealed letter. He broke it open, and inside it was written that whoever possessed the sword could kill everything that opposed him. So he took the sword from the wall, hung it at his side, and went onwards. He then entered the room where the king's daughter was lying asleep, and she was so beautiful that he stood still and, holding his breath, looked at her. He thought to himself, "How can I give an innocent maiden into the power of the wild giants who have evil in their minds?" He looked around further and saw a pair of slippers under the bed. On the right one was her father's name with a star, and on the left her own name with a star. She also wore a great neckkerchief of silk embroidered with gold, with her father's name on the right side and her own on the left, all in golden letters. The huntsman took a pair of scissors and cut the right corner off, putting it in his knapsack. He also took the right slipper with the king's name and thrust it in. The maiden still lay sleeping, quite sewn into her nightdress, and he cut a morsel from this as well and put it with the rest, doing all this without touching her. Then he went forth and left her lying asleep undisturbed. When he came to the gate again, the giants were still standing outside waiting for him, expecting he was bringing the princess. He called to them, saying they were to come in, for the maiden was already in their power. Since he could not open the gate to them, they had to creep through a hole. The first approached, and the huntsman wound the giant's hair around his hand, pulled the head in, and cut it off at one stroke with his sword, then drew the rest of him in. He called the second and cut his head off likewise, and then killed the third. He was well pleased that he had freed the beautiful maiden from her enemies and cut out their tongues, putting them in his knapsack. Then he thought, I will go home to my father and let him see what I have already done, and afterwards I will travel about the world. The luck which God is pleased to grant me will easily find me. When the king in the castle awoke, he saw the three giants lying there dead. He went into his daughter's sleeping room, woke her, and asked who could have killed the giants. She said, Dear father, I know not. I have been asleep. But when she arose and would have put on her slippers, the right one was gone. When she looked at her neckkerchief, it was cut, and the right corner was missing. When she looked at her nightdress, a piece was cut out of it. The king summoned his whole court together, soldiers and everyone else who was there, and asked who had set his daughter at liberty and killed the giants. Now it happened that he had a captain, who was one-eyed and a hideous man, and he said that he had done it. The old king then said that since he had accomplished this, he should marry his daughter. However, the maiden said, Rather than marry him, dear father, I will go away into the world as far as my legs can carry me. The king said that if she would not marry him, she should take off her royal garments, wear peasant's clothing, and go forth. She was to go to a potter and begin a trade in earthen vessels. So she put off her royal apparel, went to a potter, and borrowed crockery enough for a stall. She promised him that if she sold it by the evening, she would pay for it. When the king heard this, he ordered that she should sit in a corner and sell her wares, and he arranged for some peasants to drive their carts over them, smashing everything into 1,000 pieces. Thus, when the king's daughter had set up her stall in the street, the carts came by and shattered everything she had into tiny fragments. Overwhelmed with sadness, she lamented, Oh, how will I ever pay for these pots now? However, the king had intended by this to force her into marrying the captain. Instead, she returned to the potter and asked him if he would lend to her once more. He refused, insisting she first pay for the items she had already taken. Distressed, she went to her father, crying and pleading to go out into the world. He decided, I will have a little hut built for you in the forest, and there you shall live your life, cooking for everyone without taking payment. When the hut was ready, a sign was hung on the door, Given today, sold tomorrow. She lived there for a long time, and news spread far and wide that there was a maiden in the forest who cooked without asking for payment, as advertised on a sign outside her door. The huntsman heard about this and thought to himself, This would suit you. You are poor and have no money. So he took his air gun and knapsack, still containing all the tokens he had taken from the castle as proof of his sincerity, and ventured into the forest. There he found the hut with the sign, Given today, sold tomorrow. Wearing the sword with which he had severed the heads of the three giants, he entered the hut and ordered something to eat. He was captivated by the beautiful maiden, as lovely as any picture. She asked him where he came from and where he was going, and he replied, I am wandering the world. Curiously, she asked about his sword, recognizing her father's name on it. He confirmed he was the huntsman who had slain the giants, showing her their tongues from his knapsack as proof. He also displayed the slipper, the corner of the neckkerchief, and the piece of the nightdress. Delighted, she declared he was the one who had rescued her. Together, they went to the old king and brought him to the hut. She led him into her room and revealed that the huntsman was the true hero who had freed her from the giants. Confronted with all the evidence, the aged king could no longer doubt and gladly acknowledged the truth. He decreed that the huntsman should marry his daughter, bringing joy to her heart. She dressed him like a foreign lord, and the king arranged a lavish feast. During the feast, the captain sat on the left side of the king's daughter, while the huntsman sat on her right, disguised as a visiting lord. After eating and drinking, the old king turned to the captain and posed a riddle. Suppose someone claimed to have slain 3 giants. If asked where their tongues were and found none in their heads, what would that imply? The captain responded, "Then they must not have had any." The king corrected him, stating, "Every creature has a tongue." He then asked what punishment should befall someone who gave such an answer. The captain replied, "They should be torn to pieces." Upon hearing this, the king declared he had pronounced his own judgment. The captain was promptly imprisoned and torn into 4 pieces. Meanwhile, the king's daughter was wedded to the huntsman. He brought his parents to live with them in happiness. Upon the old king's death, he ascended to the throne, ruling the kingdom. The Flail from Heaven. A fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. Once, a countryman was going out to plow with a pair of oxen. Upon reaching the field, the horns of both animals began to grow and continued growing. When he wanted to return home, they had become so large that the oxen couldn't fit through the gateway. Fortunately, a butcher happened to pass by at that moment. The countryman handed them over to the butcher and made a deal. He would bring the butcher a measure of turnip seed, and in return, the butcher would pay him a Brabant thaler for each seed. That was indeed a good deal. The peasant then returned home, carrying the measure of turnip seed on his back. However, on the way, he accidentally dropped 1 seed from the bag. The butcher paid him exactly as agreed, and if the peasant hadn't lost the seed, he would have had 1 thaler more. Meanwhile, on his way back, the seed had grown into a tree that reached up to the sky. The peasant thought, "Since I have this opportunity, I must see what the angels are doing up there and witness it with my own eyes." So he climbed up and observed that the angels above were threshing oats, and he watched them. While he was watching, he noticed that the tree he was standing on began to sway. He looked down and saw someone about to cut it down. "If I were to fall from here, it would be a bad thing," he thought. In his desperation, he didn't know how to save himself, except by taking the chaff of the oats that were piled there and twisting it into a rope. He also grabbed a hoe and a flail that were lying around in heaven and used the rope to lower himself down. However, he landed exactly in the middle of a deep, deep hole on earth. It was fortunate that he had brought the hoe, as he used it to dig himself a staircase and climbed out. He took the flail with him as proof of his adventure, ensuring that no one would doubt his story. The Two Kings' Children, a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, there was a king who had a little boy. It had been foretold that this boy would be killed by a stag when he turned 16. When the boy reached that age, the huntsman went hunting with him. In the forest, the king's son was separated from the others, and suddenly he saw a great stag which he wanted to shoot but could not hit. Eventually, he chased the stag so far that they were completely out of the forest. Suddenly, instead of the stag, a tall man was standing there and said, "It is well that I have caught you. I have already ruined 6 pairs of glass skates running after you, and have not been able to get you." Then he took the king's son with him, dragging him through a great lake to a grand palace. He then made the boy sit down at the table with him and eat something. When they had eaten, the man said, "I have 3 daughters. You must keep watch over the eldest for 1 night, from 9 in the evening until 6 in the morning. Every hour I will come and call. If you do not answer me, you shall be put to death in the morning. But if you answer me every time, you shall have her to wife." When the young people went to the bedroom, there stood a stone image of St. Christopher. The king's daughter said to it, "My father will come at 9 o'clock and every hour until it strikes 3. When he calls, give him an answer instead of the king's son." The stone image of St. Christopher nodded its head quickly, then more slowly until it stood still. The next morning, the king said to the boy, "You have done well, but I cannot give my daughter away. You must now watch a night by my second daughter, and then I will consider whether you can have my eldest daughter to wife. I shall come every hour myself. When I call, answer me. If I call and you do not reply, your blood shall flow." They both went into the sleeping room where a larger stone image of St. Christopher stood. The king's daughter said to it, "If my father calls, you answer him." The great stone image of St. Christopher again nodded its head quickly, then more slowly until it stood still. The king's son lay down on the threshold, put his hand under his head, and slept. The next morning, the king said to him, "You have done very well, but I cannot give my daughter away. You must now watch a night by the youngest princess. Then I will consider whether you can have my second daughter to wife. I shall come every hour myself. When I call, answer me. If I call and you do not answer, your blood shall flow." Once more, they went to the sleeping room together. This time, there was a much larger and taller image of St. Christopher than the previous ones. The king's daughter said to it, "When my father calls, you answer him." The great tall stone image of St. Christopher nodded its head for quite half an hour until it finally stood still. The king's son lay down on the threshold of the door and slept. The next morning, the king said, "You have indeed watched well, but I cannot give you my daughter now. I have a great forest. If you cut it down for me between 6 o'clock this morning and 6 at night, I will think about it." Then he gave him a glass axe, a glass wedge, and a glass mallet. When he got into the wood, he began to cut, but the axe broke in two. He took the wedge and struck it once with the mallet, and it shattered into pieces as small as sand. Distressed, he believed he would have to die and sat down to weep. When it was noon, the king said, "One of you girls must take him something to eat." "No," said the two eldest, "we will not take it to him. The one with whom he last watched can take him something." Thus, the youngest was forced to go and bring him some food. When she reached the forest, she asked him how he was doing. "Oh," said he, "I am faring very badly." She then urged him to come and eat a little. "No," said he, "I cannot do that. I shall still have to die, so I will eat no more." She spoke kindly to him and begged him to try, and finally he came and ate something. After he had eaten, she said, "I will comb your hair for a while, and then you will feel better." She combed his hair, and he grew weary and fell asleep. She took her handkerchief, made a knot in it, struck it 3 times on the earth, and said, "Earth workers, come forth." Instantly, many little earthmen appeared and asked what the king's daughter commanded. She said, "In 3 hours, the great forest must be cut down, and all the wood laid in heaps." The little earthmen gathered their kin to help with the task. They began at once, and in 3 hours, the work was done. They returned to the king's daughter and told her so. She took her white handkerchief again and said, "Earth workers, go home." With that, they all disappeared. When the king's son awoke, he was delighted, and she said, "Come home when the clock strikes 6." He did as she told him, and the king asked, "Have you cleared away the forest?" "Yes," replied the king's son. When they were sitting at the table, the king said, "I cannot yet give you my daughter to wife. You must do something more for her sake." The king then explained, "I have a great fish pond. Tomorrow morning, you must clear it of all mud until it is as bright as a mirror, and fill it with every kind of fish." The next morning, the king gave him a glass shovel and said, "The fish pond must be done by 6 o'clock." He went away and, upon reaching the fish pond, stuck his shovel in the mud, which broke in two. He then tried with a hoe, which also broke. Troubled, he sat down. At noon, the youngest daughter brought him something to eat and asked how he was doing. The king's son said everything was going very poorly and he would certainly lose his head. "My tools have broken to pieces again." "Oh," she said, "you must come and eat something, and then you will feel better." "No," he said, "I cannot eat. I am too unhappy." She gave him many kind words until at last he came and ate something. Then she combed his hair again, and he fell asleep. She took her handkerchief, tied a knot in it, struck the ground thrice with the knot, and said, "Earth workers, come forth." Instantly, a great many little earthmen appeared and asked what she desired. She told them that in 3 hours, the fish pond must be entirely cleaned out, clear enough for people to see their reflections, and filled with every kind of fish. The little Earthmen summoned all their kin to help, and in 2 hours the task was completed. They returned to her and said, "We have done as you commanded." The king's daughter took the handkerchief, struck the ground thrice with it, and said, "Earth workers, go home again." Then they all went away. When the king's son awoke, the fish pond was finished. The king's daughter told him that when the clock struck 6, he should come to the house. When he arrived, the king asked, "Have you finished the fish pond?" "Yes," said the king's son. "That is very good," replied the king. When they were sitting at the table again, the king said, "You have certainly completed the fish pond, but I cannot give you my daughter yet. You must do one more thing." "What is that, then?" asked the king's son. The king explained that he had a great mountain covered in briars which needed to be cut down, and at the top of it a great castle must be built, as strong as could be conceived, with all the furniture and fittings inside. The next morning, the king gave him a glass axe and a glass gimlet, and instructed him to complete everything by 6 o'clock. As he was cutting down the first briar with the axe, it broke into tiny pieces, making it unusable, and the gimlet proved equally ineffective. He felt quite miserable and waited for his beloved to come and help him. At midday, she arrived with food. He went to meet her, told her all that had happened, ate something, and let her comb his hair until he fell asleep. Then she took the knotted handkerchief, struck the earth with it, and said, "Earth workers, come forth." Instantly, numerous earthmen appeared and asked what she desired. She instructed them to cut down all the briars and build a castle on top of the mountain within 3 hours, complete with all the necessary furnishings. They summoned their kin, and when the time was up, everything was ready. They informed the king's daughter, who then struck the earth thrice with her handkerchief and said, "Earth workers, go home," and they all disappeared. When the king's son awoke and saw everything completed, he was as happy as a bird in the air. At 6 o'clock, they went home together. The king asked, "Is the castle ready?" "Yes," replied the king's son. When they sat down to eat, the king said, "I cannot give away my youngest daughter until the 2 eldest are married." This troubled the king's son and the youngest daughter greatly, and the king's son had no idea what to do. However, that night, he went to the king's daughter and ran away with her. After they had traveled a short distance, the king's daughter saw her father following them. "Oh," she said, "what are we to do? My father is behind us and will take us back. I will change you into a briar and myself into a rose, and I will hide in the middle of the bush." When her father reached the spot, he saw a briar with a single rose. He was about to gather the rose when a thorn pricked his finger, forcing him to return home. His wife asked why he had not brought their daughter back. He explained that he had almost caught up to her, but suddenly lost sight of her, and found a briar with one rose growing in that place. The queen said, "If you had only gathered the rose, the briar would have followed." So he went back to fetch the rose, but by then the two were already far across the plain, and the king pursued them again. Once more, the daughter saw her father coming and said, "Oh, what shall we do now? I will change you into a church and myself into a priest, and I will stand in the pulpit and preach." When the king reached the place, he saw a church with a priest in the pulpit preaching. He listened to the sermon and then went home again. Then the queen asked why he had not brought their daughter with him, and he said, "Nay, I ran after her for a long time, and just as I thought I should soon overtake her, a church was standing there, and a priest was in the pulpit preaching." "You should have just brought the priest," said his wife. "Then the church would have come too. It is no use sending you. I must go myself." After walking for some time and seeing the two in the distance, the king's daughter peeped around and saw her mother coming. She said, "Now we are undone, for my mother is coming herself. I will immediately change you into a fish pond and myself into a fish." When the mother arrived at the place, there was a large fish pond with a fish leaping about and peeping out of the water, quite merry. She wanted to catch the fish, but she could not. Then she became very angry and drank up the whole pond to catch the fish, but it made her so ill that she was forced to vomit and vomited the whole pond back out. Then she cried, "I see very well that nothing can be done now," and told them they could come back to her. The king's daughter returned, and the queen gave her 3 walnuts, saying, "With these, you can help yourself when you are in your greatest need." The young couple set off once more together. After walking for 10 miles, they arrived at the castle from whence the king's son came, with a village close by. When they reached it, the king's son said, "Stay here, my dearest. I will go to the castle and return with a carriage and attendants to fetch you." When he got to the castle, everyone rejoiced greatly at having the king's son back again. He told them he had a bride waiting in the village, and they must fetch her with a carriage. They harnessed the horses at once, and many attendants seated themselves outside the carriage. As the king's son was about to get in, his mother gave him a kiss, and he forgot everything that had happened and what he was about to do. His mother then ordered the horses to be taken out of the carriage, and everyone went back into the house. Meanwhile, the maiden sat in the village, watching and waiting for him to come, but no one came. She then took service in the mill belonging to the castle and was obliged to sit by the pond every afternoon to clean the tubs. One day, the queen came on foot from the castle, walking by the pond. She saw the well-grown maiden sitting there and said, "What a fine, strong girl that is! She pleases me well." She and those with her looked at the maid, but no one recognized her. A long time passed, during which the maiden served the miller honorably and faithfully. In the meantime, the queen had sought a wife for her son, one who came from a distant part of the world. When the bride arrived, they were to be married at once. Many people hurried together, all wanting to see the event. The girl asked the miller if she might have leave to go too, and he said, "Yes, do go." Before she left, she opened one of the 3 walnuts, and inside was a beautiful dress. She put it on and went to the church, standing by the altar. When the bride and bridegroom arrived and seated themselves before the altar, the priest was just about to bless them when the bride peeped around and saw the maiden standing there. She stood up and said she would not be given away until she had as beautiful a dress as that lady there. They went back to the house and sent to ask the lady if she would sell that dress. No, she would not sell it, but the bride might perhaps earn it. The bride then asked how she was to do this. Then the maiden said, if she might sleep one night outside the king's son's door, the bride might have what she wanted. The bride agreed, saying, yes, she was willing to do that. However, the servants were ordered to give the king's son a sleeping drink. The maiden laid herself down on the threshold and lamented all night long, recounting how she had the forest cut down for him, cleaned out the fish pond for him, built the castle for him, and transformed him into a briar, then into a church, and finally into a fish pond, only for him to forget her so quickly. The king's son did not hear a word, but the servants, who had been awakened, listened without understanding what it meant. The next morning, the bride put on the dress and went to the church with the bridegroom. Meanwhile, the maiden opened the second walnut, finding an even more beautiful dress inside. She put it on and stood by the altar in the church, and everything happened as before. Again, the maiden lay all night on the threshold outside the king's son's chamber. This time, the servant gave him something to keep him awake instead of the sleeping drink. The king's son went to bed, and the miller's maiden bemoaned herself on the threshold, recounting all that she had done for him. The king's son heard everything and was deeply troubled. Remembering what had happened, he wanted to go to her, but his mother had locked the door. The next morning, he went to his beloved at once and told her everything that had happened, begging her not to be angry with him for having forgotten her. The king's daughter then opened the third walnut, revealing a still more magnificent dress. She put it on and went with her bridegroom to the church. Numbers of children came, giving them flowers and offering gay ribbons to bind about their feet. They were blessed by the priest and had a merry wedding. The false mother and the bride had to depart, and the mouth of the person who last told all this is still warm. The Cunning Little Tailor, a fairy tale by the brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, there was a princess who was extremely proud. Whenever a wooer came, she gave him a riddle to guess. If he could not solve it, he was sent away contemptuously. She also announced that whoever solved her riddle would marry her, no matter who he was. Eventually, 3 tailors came together. The 2 eldest thought they had done so many dexterous bits of work successfully that they could not fail to succeed in this as well. The third was a little useless landlooper who did not even know his trade, but he thought he must have some luck in this venture, for where else was it to come from? The 2 others said to him, "Just stay at home. Thou canst not do much with thy little bit of understanding." However, the little tailor did not let himself be discouraged, and said he had set his head to work for once and would manage well enough. He went forth as if the whole world were his. All 3 announced themselves to the princess and asked her to propound her riddle to them, stating that the right persons had now come, with understanding so fine they could be threaded in a needle. The princess said, "I have 2 kinds of hair on my head. Of what color are they?" "If that be all," said the first, "it must be black and white, like the cloth called pepper and salt." The princess replied, "Wrongly guessed. Let the second answer." The second said, "If it be not black and white, then it is brown and red, like my father's company coat." "Wrongly guessed," said the princess. "Let the third give the answer, for I see very well he knows it for certain." Then the little tailor stepped boldly forth and said, "The princess has a silver and a golden hair on her head, and those are the 2 different colors." When the princess heard that, she turned pale and nearly fell down with terror, for the little tailor had guessed her riddle, and she had firmly believed that no man on earth could discover it. When her courage returned, she said, "Thou hast not won me yet by that. There is still something else thou must do. Below in the stable is a bear with which thou shalt pass the night. If I get up in the morning and thou art still alive, thou shalt marry me." She expected, however, to rid herself of the tailor, for the bear had never yet left anyone alive who had fallen into his clutches. The little tailor did not let himself be frightened away. Instead, he was quite delighted and said, "Boldly ventured is half won." When evening came, our little tailor was taken down to the bear. The bear was about to set upon the little fellow at once and give him a hearty welcome with his paws. "Softly, softly," said the little tailor. "I will soon make thee quiet." Then, quite composedly, and as if he had not an anxiety in the world, he took some nuts out of his pocket, cracked them, and ate the kernels. When the bear saw that, he was seized with a desire to have some nuts too. The tailor felt in his pockets and reached him a handful. They were, however, not nuts, but pebbles. The bear put them in his mouth but could get nothing out of them no matter how hard he bit. "Eh," thought he, "what a stupid blockhead I am. I cannot even crack a nut." Then he said to the tailor, "Here, crack me the nuts." "See what a stupid fellow thou art," said the little tailor, "to have such a great mouth and not be able to crack a small nut." Then he took the pebble, nimbly put a nut in his mouth in its place, and crack! It was in 2. "I must try the thing again," said the bear. "When I watch you, I think I ought to be able to do it too." So the tailor once more gave him a pebble, and the bear tried and tried to bite into it with all his strength. However, he could not accomplish it. When that was over, the tailor took out a violin from beneath his coat and played a piece on it. When the bear heard the music, he could not help beginning to dance. After dancing for a while, he enjoyed it so much that he said to the little tailor, "Hark you, is the fiddle heavy?" "Light enough for a child. Look, with the left hand I lay my fingers on it, and with the right I stroke it with the bow, and then it goes merrily, hopsa viva la lera. Fiddling is something I would like to understand too, so I might dance whenever I fancy. What dost thou think of that? Wilt thou give me lessons?" "With all my heart," said the tailor, "if thou hast a talent for it. But let me see thy claws first. They are terribly long. I must cut thy nails a little." Then a vise was brought, and the bear put his claws in it. The little tailor screwed it tight and said, "Now wait until I come with the scissors." He let the bear growl as he liked, lay down in the corner on a bundle of straw, and fell asleep. When the princess heard the bear growling so fiercely during the night, she believed he was growling for joy and had made an end of the tailor. In the morning, she arose carelessly and happily, but when she peeped into the stable, the tailor stood gaily before her and was as healthy as a fish in water. Now she could not say another word against the wedding because she had given a promise before everyone. The king ordered a carriage to be brought, and she was to drive to church with the tailor to be married. After they got into the carriage, the two other tailors, who had false hearts and envied him his good fortune, went into the stable and unscrewed the bear. The bear, in great fury, ran after the carriage. The princess heard him snorting and growling. She was terrified and cried, "Ah, the bear is behind us and wants to get thee." The tailor was quick, stood on his head, stuck his legs out of the window, and cried, "Dost thou see the vice? If thou dost not be off, thou shalt be put into it again." When the bear saw that, he turned around and ran away. The tailor drove quietly to church, and the princess was married to him at once. He lived with her as happily as a woodlark. Whosoever does not believe this must pay a thaler. The Bright Sun Brings It to Light, a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. A tailor's apprentice was traveling about the world in search of work. At one time, he could find none, and his poverty was so great that he had not a farthing to live on. Presently, he met a Jew on the road. Thinking the Jew would have a great deal of money, the tailor thrust God out of his heart, fell on the Jew, and said, "Give me thy money, or I will strike thee dead." The Jew replied, "Grant me my life. I have no money but 8 farthings." The tailor, however, insisted, "Money thou hast, and it shall be produced," and used violence, beating him until he was near death. When the Jew was dying, his last words were, "The bright sun will bring it to light," and thereupon he died. The tailor's apprentice felt in his pockets and sought for money, but found nothing but the 8 farthings, as the Jew had said. He then took him up, carried him behind a clump of trees, and continued onward to seek work. After traveling for a long while, he got work in a town with a master who had a pretty daughter. He fell in love with her, married her, and lived in good and happy wedlock. After a long time, when he and his wife had 2 children, the wife's father and mother died, and the young couple kept house alone. One morning, when the husband was sitting at the table before the window, his wife brought him his coffee. As he poured it into the saucer and was just about to drink, the sun shone on it, and the reflection gleamed hither and thither on the wall above, making circles. The tailor looked up and said, "Yes, it would like very much to bring it to light, and cannot." The woman said, "Oh, dear husband, what is that then? What dost thou mean by that?" He answered, "I must not tell thee." She insisted, "If thou lovest me, thou must tell me," using her most affectionate words, and promised that no one should ever know it, leaving him no rest. Finally, he told her how years ago, when he was traveling about seeking work, completely worn out and penniless, he had killed a Jew. In the last agonies of death, the Jew had spoken the words, "The bright sun will bring it to light." Now, the sun had just wanted to bring it to light, had gleamed and made circles on the wall, but had not been able to do it. After this, he particularly charged her never to tell this, or he would lose his life. She promised. However, when he had sat down to work again, she went to her great friend and confided the story to her, with the caveat that she was never to repeat it to any human being. Yet, before 2 days were over, the whole town knew it. The tailor was brought to trial and condemned. Thus, after all, the bright sun did bring it to light.